few things, but I care very deeply about them.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I think has saved me is that I care a lot about fiction. And I think that but I really love fiction. I really love reading.
Yeah.
And so it's made my world really rich. But if I didn't have any fiction, oh my goodness, I would be a vacuum, vapid. Nothing would be here because I'm just like,
All that. So yeah, no, with the start. So welcome, Joy.
Thank you.
To the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on. Obviously, we've been trying to do this for a little while as well. Like been a fan of yours for a little while now. You know, like seeing your kind of just your passion. You know, in your kind of mission in that, in the work that you do, trying to get the message out. You know, I can always see that you actually, you really care about what you're talking about. You know, and it kind of hits home. You know, like you talk about a lot of experiences that a lot of parents go through, you know, in regards of interacting with the school boundaries and kind of navigating that boundaries, you know, trying to find what schools to choose and things like that as well, and people's like personal experiences in schools. So it's definitely been an honour to have you on. So welcome. We just like to start, normally we start with a general kind of introduction.
Okay.
You know, so just tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of how you kind of got into kind of teaching.
Sure. A bit about myself. I'm an educator. I'm a teacher. What else am I? I'm a mother. I'm a friend. I'm a sister. I wear so many different hats depending on the day. Today I'm on a podcast. I would say I'm a podcaster today. How did I get into education? So I think my home was a home. I would say I was homeschooled in a lot of ways. My mum was a head teacher. And so our summers were spent doing work. Our half terms, my mum taught me how to read. She taught me how to do mental maths. I was reading before I went to school. And my love for reading started from such a young age. And I think what books gave me was a sense of belonging, a sense of being seen and being just held, you know, and just being able to, it enriched my life. And so I think a love for English is really the thing that took me to the classroom. But it's only when I became a teacher that I realized that, I don't have any black people in the stories that I used to write as a child. Like when I thought about all the stories I'd write as a child, because obviously when you're a reader, by virtue of being a reader, sometimes you dabble in writing, and I found a passion for writing. None of the characters I wrote about were black. I thought to myself, well, how did that happen? And that's because none of the books I read had black characters. And so while I had this sense of belonging and being enriched, was I really seen? Was I really affirmed? Absolutely not. It's only when I read Noughts and Crosses when I was 11 years old, I read it really young. When I read that book and I realised that Sephi was black, I thought to myself, my goodness, my life, I think that changed my life forever. There was a switch that came on. And so I think after I read that book, I started to really consider different things, but it was all happening subconsciously. You know, your interactions with teachers change. But you don't have language for it. And I think that's the powerlessness of being a child. You don't have the language for the experiences that you're having until you get older. And I got into the classroom and I was like, okay, it can't be this. So if I have to teach this, which is all white, all male literature, in my own personal life, I must try and liberate my mind and open my mind to different things. And so, that's how I became a teacher. But the kind of teacher I became was through reading, entering the classroom and seeing this disconnect that still exists today and thinking, how can I do something about it, you know?
And then what was you like in school?
I was lazy. I was so lazy in school. I love school. What was I like? Okay, from a student's perspective, I was popular. I was well liked. Very friendly. I still love people. So had lots of different friends, lots of different groups that I would go around with. I didn't really belong anywhere. Was a misfit, and so I still experience that now. Actually, I don't really quite fit in any box. So it's like, are you a content creator? Are you a teacher? Yeah, you're a consultant. I'm still finding that sense of people trying to like put me somewhere, and I'm just not. It just doesn't quite fit. From a teacher's perspective, they would have probably found me a bit arrogant. Yes, I think so. I think they would have been right at the time. I was quite cocky. I really bought into the idea of my potential. And I don't think you should tell children all the time how much potential they have, because then they get lazy, arrogant and complacent. They do get that way. And that's what I became very much, I can do this. But I think I was also painfully insecure. And that translated into where potential, the link between those two things is when people keep telling you how much potential you have, it becomes pressure to perform. And then you get afraid, like, is this potential really real? And so I just got super kind of, I'm not going to revise just in case. And, when I'd get a grade and it wasn't that good, I'd be like, well, if I'd just worked. But then there were some teachers that really loved me and I loved them too. From my parents' perspective, I just didn't work hard enough. I just read books. The day before my English GCSE or my GCSEs in general, I was just reading fiction because that's what I like to do. So thankfully, because I read, I was able to get through the system quite comfortably. Yeah.
So you kind of found it not easy, but it was...
Yeah, it was manageable. It was manageable. It definitely was. I didn't feel any real strain. I think I only started to feel strain when I started to drop in sets. And of course you have teacher bias. So I'm eloquent, I'm friendly, I'm articulate. So you don't want to take me from set 1 to set 3. But my grades don't look like a set 1 student's grades. So eventually I started to fall, and I think that was when the strain started, and that's when I started to work a bit harder around year 10. Got back into set 2 in maths, and I was very happy there. So yeah.
And was it quite a kind of diverse makeup in your school?
Yes, I would say so, actually. I would say so. Not in terms of the teachers, but definitely the student body. Majority Asian, then black, then white. So it was quite diverse.
But you say not really the teachers?
No.
Was there any black teachers at all? Or?
I only had one black teacher during my whole time in school. Big up Miss Sule. She used to drop me to school. She was incredible. I don't know what safeguarding was going on there, but she would see me on the street. Joy, get in. We'd drive to school together. Everybody thought she was my mum, and she took me as her child. And I guess that's the power of having someone who looks like you in the classroom. They love you without reason. They support you and back you without needing a reason to. I didn't have to be intelligent. She just saw me. And then I also had my head of year, who was also black, but yes.
So, well, there's two.
Two.
Kind of, at least. I remember for me, there was about 3.
Okay.
3 there, but all 3 of them we didn't really identify with.
Interesting.
So it was, we almost didn't see them. I wouldn't say we didn't see them as black, but they didn't really, we didn't really feel that they tried to really engage with us, and a few of them, you could visibly see that we kind of disappointed them.
Wow.
Because there was various different times for me in school, for example, where I'd be being a fool, acting up, getting into trouble and things like that. And you could really see the disappointment that they was kind of looking at us in the way they was treating us and things like that, which at the time you didn't know why. You're just a young person, and you don't actually know. It's only as I got older, I kind of understood where somebody was coming from. From being in the similar position then as an adult myself, and then where you're seeing almost what you may view as kind of potential going to waste, or opportunities being wasted.
Sure.
And especially for me, where I've worked throughout the whole system, and I've seen people, how it can go wrong almost, right. From that kind of educational point, and how the slope can go downwards, where they go from mainstream education to alternative provisions and youth justice provisions, prisons, and so on and so forth. But at that time, when I was in the system myself, it wasn't something that I was thinking about. And I remember once even one of the teachers kind of sat down, me and about 4 of my kind of black friends, and to give us the talk.
Yes.
But I think because he didn't do any of the work to build up the relationship in the first place. So that's why we didn't listen to the message, and I think that's where a lot of teachers go wrong for me in regards to that relationship building, even like you were saying that their teacher was dropping you to school, obviously that wouldn't be allowed now, but that's an important part of a relationship building, when it comes to trust, so if you was going through any issues in school, for example, that could be a person now who you could trust, who you can go to, you can speak to. I remember my own personal experiences that I just didn't feel like those kind of individuals existed in school. I always felt like if I had a problem in school, I'd have to speak to somebody outside of school, not a teacher and things like that as well. And I think one of the things I've noticed here, even just with the work that I've done previously, is that just like what you're saying, representation matters.
Yeah.
There's literally, I've done work before where you can literally see their eyes light up when they see me. Where just to see, it's like us.
Yeah.
The guards go down. Yeah. It's going to relax. Yeah. The engagement's kind of totally different. And I've seen almost the opposite as well. So I've seen when other people have come in, and then the walls go up now because how they've used to dealing with certain groups and the type of interactions that they used to be seeing. So yeah, it's definitely, it's quite tricky positions, that for me, young people find themselves
yes
in school, which is it's a shame, really, because even with the engagement part of it for me, that's kind of really important. You know, like how you kind of engage with young people, you know, and from some of my experience at school, I've seen like that's where a lot of schools could do a lot more work on.
Yes.
You know, understanding the young people that they're working with, because for me, if you don't understand them, it's really going to be really difficult to engage with them because
Completely.
you don't, you don't really identify with them, and I think sometimes that's the almost for me the black privilege in those situations. I think because you're almost used to being an outsider, you're used to adapting into different situations.
Yeah.
You know, like I think I'll probably know more about white culture, for example,
Sure.
than the average white person would know about black culture.
Yeah.
Just by default of someone living in the UK, growing up in the UK and things like that, you know, where it's like, for example, I could probably name 10 rock bands, but I don't listen to rock music, you know, but I'm just tapped into what's going on, where on the verse sometimes they won't be able to name 10 artists that I listen to. They don't 10
No,
reggae
that's true.
artists, for example.
They
They can make it
know,
go, probably could go Bob Marley,
and that's the end of that.
and that's it, you know. Maybe rappers, because rap's probably crossed over now into kind of mainstream culture. Then but I think just naturally growing up and football, like there's more parts of kind of links to kind of engage with people that I think that we have,
Yes.
that they do, and I think that's for me definitely one of the issues that I think happens in a lot of mainstreams, you know, is the kids feeling like they're not understood.
Yes.
You know, like similar to what you're saying as well. Like, it's that feeling of being seen.
Yes.
You know, not having to kind of mansplain,
Yes.
over-explain
Yeah.
some stuff. You know,
I
and
agree.
that is, I would imagine that one of the key differences between, for example, if you went to school here, or if you went to school like in like a predominantly black country, you know, that massive element, that issue with race is almost like evaporates instantly, and now you can just focus on learning. And obviously, there's a million other issues,
Of course,
that are
will still
affecting
exist.
young people. So it's not, once you take it out, it's plain sailing.
Of course.
But you just definitely don't have that
As a barrier.
as a barrier. So as someone who's been in leadership positions as well, how have you found that? Have you found that an easy kind of progression from the way you started off into leadership positions, or was there kind of hurdles along the way?
I actually had I had a lot of privilege in that my ascension to leadership was, I would say, quite seamless, in that I did 2 years as like first qualified, then a newly qualified teacher, you know, the first 2 years that you do. And then I changed schools, and I became an assistant head of English. Then I became head of English. Then I became assistant head teacher. And that was all within the space of about 5 years, 5.5 years. And so where there are some people, it takes them about 10 years, 15 years to get to a certain position. Mine was quite accelerated, but it wasn't accelerated because I just, you know, had it like that, and I was just like impressing people. It wasn't, I was working tirelessly. And I did have the understanding that as a black woman, I had to work harder than everybody else in order to be seen as, you know, capable. That is still the case. It's still the case. And I'm often told online by racists that, you know, I have a victim mentality and a chip on my shoulder. And if race is a barrier, then I am a victim.
Yeah.
Indeed, I am a victim of racism. Indeed, I have had to work harder. You know, I'm aware of the barriers that I face, in the same way you are aware of the barriers that you face, but maybe you don't want to articulate them for whatever reason. But there is no shame in me saying, actually, I had to work harder to get here. And I know that because we went through the school system, and I was reared to work harder. And so I know that my experience of the education system is quite unique. But I also know that if we went bang for bang, I was outworking you, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure. There was a point at which my head teacher had to say to me, Joy, this building needs to close and you need to go home. I've gotten to school at 6 o'clock and I've left at 9:30 easily, PM.
Wow.
And so I didn't get there because I was waiting for it to happen. I knew where I wanted to get to, and I worked tirelessly towards it. And I made sure that I've never missed a deadline. I've never been to work late. There's just so many. I've never had the issues that would usually ensue. I kept myself to myself. I didn't have any friends at work. I didn't go to the staff room. There were so many things I just did. I kept my head down and I just worked. But I know that you shouldn't have to do all of those things to experience leadership. You should be able to make mistakes, you know, show up as yourself, Not work like you're, you know, you own the building. For
exactly,
example, there are so many people who have gotten to my position and even higher who haven't done a tenth of the work that I've done. It shouldn't have to be like this, but this is the space that we find ourselves in. So yes, I experienced some privilege, but of course, there's also the plight, the barriers that I was overcoming, you know, preemptively almost.
And like, what was, when you first became a teacher, what was the surprises? Was there anything surprising that you kind of noticed?
I was surprised at the racism that I experienced. That's what I was surprised by. I was surprised by the microaggressions. Like, I remember one day I wore hoops to work and they were like, "You look unprofessional." I was like, whoa, okay. Then there was another day where I was wearing a dress, and every day up until that point, I'd always worn tights. I'd always worn tights. And I don't know why I just thought to myself, you know, I think it was hot. So I said, let me not wear tights. And by the way, my white counterparts are wearing skirts that are this long. So I'm thinking that, you know, the dress code is, you know, quite liberal. So I don't wear tights that day. The dress hits my knee, by the way. I have a meeting. So sorry, Joy. You look inappropriate. I said, I went to the toilet, I took a picture for my sisters, I put it in the group chat. I said, is this a bad dress? What is going on here? So many stories that I can tell you of just even, I'm standing with the students where I think they're looking for a lesson, and the deputy head says everybody needs to disperse.
Who, me? Home early.
What is it me? You look like a sixth former or whatever it is. I'm a teacher I'm a teacher at your school. Is it that you don't recognize that? However way you tell the reason why you felt that you could tell me to disperse. It never ends well.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I was surprised by the level of racism that I faced personally, despite the position of power I found myself in.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, like, I've had similar experiences like that. Once I remember once I was working in a school delivering a workshop, and I hurt my foot previously, so I was wearing like sliders.
Okay.
You know, like, because my foot was a bit swollen, you know. So anyway, so I'm just working like throughout the day, not knowing that like there's been various complaints from the teachers to other teachers about my inappropriate footwear. You know, there's been a meeting, like all these things happening. I have no idea what's happening. And what actually like made me laugh is then they kind of sent the black teacher to come speak to me about it. So there was a whole meeting about it, but then they sent the guy who was kind of cool with, he was kind of similar, my age group to me. He was like really good with the kids and things like that. And he kind of pulled me aside and was like, yeah, you know, you can't wear these. And I was like, so where does it say that you can't wear them? And he said, well, it doesn't really say that. But, you know, like they like, they like us to be like, to present a certain way for the students and things like that as well. And at the time I was thinking, you haven't even asked me why I'm actually wearing them, you know? And then when I explained it, it was like, oh, cool, don't worry about it. But I was thinking like, you've led with thinking that almost like judging me.
Of course.
Like based on my footwear, you know? And that was one thing that because I used to work in various different schools, and always used to just feel the judgment almost straight away, you know? But I remember early on in my career, dressing a certain way to kind of fit in.
Okay.
So I wouldn't dress almost how I would normally dress on the day-to-day.
Sure.
So I'd wear probably more of a straighter trousers, maybe a shirt. It almost just to look like almost like what the term is, but yeah, just somebody who just really just fits in and kind of blends in. But that wouldn't be what I'd wear on a normal day. So on a normal day, I might wear a tracksuit, I might wear a t-shirt, I might wear trainers, I might wear a cap, and all those things. And then it's almost like a camouflage that I would now put on to work in those systems because of what I saw, you know. And that for me has always been a barrier. I think as well in a lot of schools sometimes is even like some of the uniforms that the teachers wear. You know, that whole suit, tie, done up. You know, you're. It's like a lazy way of gaining authority. You know, it's a lazy way of putting yourself in a position of power.
That's really interesting.
You know, it's like, because we all have certain relationships with people with suits and ties. Yeah. You're a teacher. You know, you're not like you're not the custodian of the establishment. You're not a guardian. You know, you're just here to teach. You're here to educate. You're here to help. You're here to support. So if that's not what you would normally wear, you know, why are you now almost forcing that? You know, and it's that what I said for me. It's like this lazy kind of discipline. You know, it's like it's a way of putting the barriers, and that's where I thought a lot of schools going wrong is in the amount of barriers that they put between them and the students.
You're right, absolutely.
You know, because they can't now connect with you now because you're in a suit and tie, one barrier, Mr. Johnson, two barriers. You won't share nothing personal, another barrier. It's just barriers upon barriers upon barriers when like it's not needed.
It's not. Absolutely not. I know that my students, I used to tell them stories about my life all the time. I think I did a documentary on the BBC a few years back, and my best friend came back to me, and it was in my classroom. It was about the work I was doing in schools, and she came to me and she said, who I saw on the documentary is who I've been friends with my whole life. And it was the greatest compliment because I didn't change.
Yeah.
My students, when I see them now, I was in Brixton the other day driving and I saw one of my old students and I called her name from the car.
Yeah.
And she knows who. It's not straight back tied. No. And that's not to say I was unprofessional, but I was nurturing. I'm part of the village that are raising these children. I can't afford to be distant. You know, I'm spending more time with them than their own parents. I'm seeing them more frequently. What good does it do for them if I am so distant from them and what they really feel? And if I truly want to make this subject their subject and accessible, how can I remain inaccessible? I think that's bad practice, really.
Yeah.
It's bad teaching practice. I have to give something to get something. And that's not to say I tell you, I'm having issues with my husband at the moment. That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But if I have a funny anecdote, for example, or if something's happening, it's just, you know, you just as you would in the kind of like teaching environment, a teaching learning environment. You know, sometimes you have it like as we're speaking now, you've had an anecdote that's come into your mind.
Yeah.
You don't suppress the anecdote. It's like, no, it's a teacher. You share, and I get to know a bit about you, and then we move on to something else. And I think that's what teaching environments should be like.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because even like I see a lot, for example, like kids will say to like a teacher, "Have you got any kids?" And they'll be like, "Oh yeah, I can't tell you that. I can't."
Yeah.
And it's like, why can't you?
Yeah.
You know, like
strange.
you don't have to give their full medical history, you know, but you can say that, you know, because they're actually really just trying to get to know you in that moment.
They just want
you know?
they want
they're
the
not
connection.
trying to get some ammunition to use later on against you and stuff like that as well. Exactly that. They're trying to connect with you. You know, they what a lot of young people, what I found out, they're really interested in people's motivations.
Sure.
So sometimes that's what they're using to really identify, like, why you're here.
Why do you do what you do?
Do you care about me? Do you care about young people?
Do you care about me? How much do you care about me? That is what they're asking.
Exactly. And
why are you here?
What
do
are
you
your
want from me?
What are your credentials?
Yeah.
And for me, the same way you as a teacher had to have a job interview, you shouldn't be afraid to kind of give your credentials to a young person.
But I think it's the fear, isn't it? There is that fear, just of being seen, being vulnerable. Teachers don't know everything, but position themselves as experts in everything. And so I remember I would spell things wrong, and they would correct me, and I would apologize. Yeah. And if I didn't know something about the subject, I'm not a historian, so sometimes they'd teach me, and I'd stop the lesson so that they could teach me, because it's a teaching and learning environment.
Yeah.
My students are my greatest teachers. They've taught me so much about the world, and I've taught them so much about the world too. That's what it's an exchange. But if your pride and your ego doesn't allow you to be a learner in your own classroom, I have to question what kind of teacher, how effective you are as a teacher, because even learning is even knowing that a certain lesson didn't really work, or a certain child needs to do this, but if you are above learning, then you might not be picking up on that at all.
Yeah. So in becoming a teacher, how did you find the training?
I felt that it was at odds with, I loved the training, by the way. I loved my course leader. She was just phenomenal. What a woman. She was just so loving, so nurturing, and so supportive. And so I think she made my transition into teaching seamless, but it was absolutely at odds with the ferociousness, the viciousness of the system. And you would feel that every single week. So you do 4 days you do 3 months kind of prep work, and then you go into schools. I did the PGCE route, right? So I did the university route. And so Monday to Thursday I'd be in the schools, and then Friday I'd be at university. And I just feel this sense of, oh, this is the utopia. This is you preparing me for a world that doesn't really exist. There's no sexism here, there's no racism, there's no homophobia, there's no Islamophobia. All the phobia, that's all gone. The ists, that doesn't exist on these Friday sessions when we're here to speak about, and play and imagine and be free. There's no marking either. you know, but in my reality, Monday to Thursday, I am confronted with the safeguarding issues, the racism, the sexism. This is from the teachers, by the way, not the students. But the students too are doing their own stuff.
Yeah.
So in so many ways, you're unprepared. The teacher, the training doesn't prepare you for what you're actually going into, you know. But I enjoyed it. It was respite on a Friday, you know. It was nice to breathe, and you know, they were like my fellow comrades in the war. You know, we'd sit down with our battle scars and say, "Oh, what a week it's been." But was I prepared for the 10-year career that I had? Absolutely not. No.
And so then, what do you think could have been added to it to actually make it more kind of fit for purpose?
That's a really great question. I think perhaps they could have stopped speaking about what the ideal should be and spoken more about the realities and how to overcome them. So the issues with the workload, for example. Of course, you don't want me to not become a teacher, so you're not speaking about the fact that I don't have the time to do what is required of me, or I won't have the time to do what's required of me because of the PGC route. At most, you're teaching, you know, 1 period a day. So even though you're stressed out, you're not really dealing with the realities of teaching. But I think we should have been taught how to mark effectively, how to live mark. How to manage your workload, how to deal with a manager who is resistant to listening to you about a safeguarding concern, for example. There are so many practical situations that we could have been empowered to respond to, but I found myself on the ground without any of that knowledge. You know, and and that was disempowering in a lot of ways.
And did they do any work in around the engagement with different groups or anything like that? Is that not part of the?
I think they did a session on LGBTQ+, I think. But I think they blended it together. So I think it was like, or somebody mentioned race in the session. Yeah. And everybody was like, whoa, why are you talking about race? This is obviously pre-2020. And so, yes, that they didn't really speak. And that's why I speak about the utopia. In the utopia, there aren't these barriers, these kind of cultural barriers, systemic barriers that we're having to overcome, that our children are. There's no child poverty. We just love our subject and we're here to learn. But I loved that, you know, because I loved my subject, but I was unprepared, you know. So
because that's definitely what I've seen like a lot, you know, is kind of, even like what you said, like, is unprepared teachers. Yeah. You know, it's teachers that are really full of good intentions.
That's it.
You know, they come into the profession for the right reasons, really hopeful, like full of energy, and then they're placed in a inner city school, South London.
In London, and the child tells you to shut up.
Yeah, straight away. And then
your first day.
Then almost like, what do you do?
I remember once, I started at a new school, and I said to the students, okay, I would like you to turn to the person next to you and speak about, you know, why this character might go on this adventure. And they stared at me and did not say a word. Yeah. And we just stared at each other for about 30 seconds. And I said, oh, you're not going to be doing it? No worries. You can write your responses down. But that wasn't part of my training. And I think by not speaking to the groups as you were unprepared, but you're unprepared, especially if you're not a person of colour, you're unprepared for those barriers. So you're well-intentioned, privileged, colourblind. You go into the school with all your biases. Nobody has questioned them. You've done no interrogation. So when this child tells you to shut up, or whatever he may say, or my bias, whatever they may say, you don't know what you're doing. Every ism in the world hits that child's head, and you have the power to send them where they need to go because you are the powerful one, and you've got to show them who's boss. You've done no internal work.
Yeah, and it never. A lot of times in those situations, it never ends well. Ever. You know, because what you notice as well is that almost that energy just locates itself somewhere else. Yes. So you think you've expelled that individual from the room, but you haven't expelled the energy. Yes. Someone's going to take up that mantle now. So true. You know, so true. And then you can't expel everybody.
So true.
You know, it's you're better off trying to actually deal with what that energy is almost like representing. Right. You know, like, why is that person telling you to shut up? Why are they not engaging?
Of course. I remember I had a child who told me I was a shit teacher, and he had so much rage towards me for various reasons. We did a lot of work to try and figure out why, to the point that, and the class, it was the same class where they didn't like me at first. But by the end, because they could see that I was trying, they'd turn to the student and be like, what is this?
Yeah.
What is going on here? Like, at first, it's funny to watch this teacher look uncomfortable, but now we want to learn. We've got GCSEs and she's not doing anything wrong to you. But if I'd been like, get out of here now, maybe it would have led to them fearing me. Maybe it would have led to a quicker route to respect. But I earned their respect by showing actually it doesn't matter what I'm faced with. I'm going to dig my heels in and work with you because I believe that you need a GCSE. But if I'd just been like, I'm not teaching you, get out of my classroom, I don't think we would have been able to get to where we got to in the end.
No, definitely, because I think a lot of teachers for me don't really see themselves as leaders in that moment. You know, like they probably just see themselves as teachers. You know, but you are also a leader, so you are also modeling a lot of qualities, and a lot of the stuff that you're doing is having an effect. You know,
Sure.
like on the group. You know, like a lot of times in that situation, like even like what I've noticed that like in that hypothetical situation we're talking about, if you could have got that person on side, for example, then you're probably going to get the whole group on side. You know, like as I said before, for me, getting that person outside of the group is probably not going to work as you think it is. It might work as a short-term solution, but as I said, in the long term, someone else is going to take up that mantle and become the troublesome individual, as we call it. That person now is just now going to, like, there's going to be somebody else like disrupting. And there's so many times for me, I've learned that even the hard way. Because on the flip side, I do understand what a lot of the educators and teachers are going through in those moments when you do feel like you might have 24 people in front, everybody's against you, and there's one person who's just really just onto you. In that moment, you kind of develop that fantasy, you know. If I get rid of Tom, everything's going to be fine because she wants to learn, he wants to learn, he wants to learn. Tom doesn't want to learn. You know, you almost feel like you're sacrificing the one for the many.
And it's the fantasy, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then you send them to the ice. And you said something right to the top where you said that they're not leaders. They don't see themselves as leaders. I found that they become like, I don't know how to say it, like enactors of the state. I don't know if that's the right term, but like they become representative of this rule book, or the head teacher, for example. So they just start going through a system. I've been told if someone does this, I call this. The personalization of or individualistic approach to learning about the student is gone, and it's just about running them through. You're at red, you got to go, and then they have to go to this isolation room, for example, and that room has its own culture and its own visitors who frequent there all of the time. And I don't know, there's something about that, and I see this conversation a lot on Twitter, now known as X. I see the conversation all the time. If a student, you've got some people who believe that you are the social part of being a student is being able to be with your friends and being in this learning environment and this social cohesion that takes place. And when you take a child out of that and you remove them from the people they usually see, the friends who they're usually taught by, and put them in a room for 6 hours, what are you doing to them? Then you've got other people who are saying, but everybody's got a right to learn. And if this person continually disrupts a lesson, why should they have the privilege of learning and being taught? And is there a right answer? And I say the reason I put that to you is because I've been in both. I know both sides. I know when it's actually I don't know if you can learn in this room anymore. Yeah. But whether or not you should go to the isolation room, that's a different. Yeah. That's the different.
I think, and that's the thing for me. Like for me, I don't know the stats, but my own personal opinion is I reckon it's got about 2% success rate, the isolation room. You know, like whatever you're trying to do, it's not working. It might work for you in that moment. As I said, that person now is left your group now. They're somewhere else, but they don't learn in that. You know, a lot of what you see in that room, it's not a continuation of learning. You know, as I said to you, you are just removed and put in almost like an eternal prison. You know, for a period of time. And it's the same thing we know about the prison system in this country, for example, is that it doesn't really work. Yes. You know, yes, people have to be punished. Yes, there has to be consequences for your actions. Yeah. But putting people like in a room by themselves for a long period of time doesn't solve anything.
It doesn't. And I think that we know that prison doesn't work as it is. We also know that schools don't work as they are. We know that because the GCSEs are not getting better, right? So something is wrong, okay? Ofsted is having to change. It's for something, we know things, but we're still doing the same thing over and over again. Why is that? I think it's because if we take out the isolation room and we stop suspending and excluding children, we have to rework our entire society we have to, our framework, we have to have a paradigm shift completely, where retribution isn't the first thought, it's restorative. We restore. I don't know if we can do that. And because that would have to change the way that not just schools work, workplaces, like these, before, was it PIPs, before, we'd have to take those. There'd be so many different things that would change, or uniforms, if you work in a certain shop, that would have to change, because uniforms are used in schools too. Like, there's so many ways that we see what happens in schools replicated, or you can see, with the reason why we are able to be successful when we go out into the world is because we are conditioned via the schooling system. We'd have to change everything, and that's why nothing is changing, because there's too much that would have to change. So we just keep having casualties. There are less people in prison than are free. There's less people failing than are succeeding in their GCSEs. So we just keep going along.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree with you. There's definitely that fear, to change anything. And I think when you think about the people who are in charge of the change, are they really invested in long-term change? Because if you're like a politician, for example, your normal remit is going to be like 4 years, however long your party is kind of be in power. So my opinion has always been like they're really focused on just doing what they need to do for that 4 years. Sure. Or you get the other school of thought for me is that they're really just performers to their own audiences.
Okay.
So for example, it would be, what we need to do? We need to just more maths, more science. That's what the audience says. They just repeat that kind of saying, and then they're quite happy, and then even, because I always think about, when I think about the system in the whole, for example, is a broken system, but it's a broken system for almost a small group. And if you don't care about that small group, you're going to see your system as working.
Yes.
Because exactly. What they kind of feel that the purpose of this, for the wider society, in the UK, for example, they probably feel it works.
Of course.
Because when you think about the almost, for me, the general purpose of education, loosely for me is to provide suitable people for the workforce. So people that are obedient, people that listen, people that conform, the type of traits that people see in the workplaces are the kind of things they're almost trying to breed into people as young people. So for them, for me, I think it works because it's almost like a proven conveyor belt. But for a lot of people who are a little bit different, the system doesn't work at all.
It doesn't.
And where I think they're going massively wrong is that, like, society is changing. It's one of the things that, like, I always say for me is that I feel I was almost educated the same way my parents were educated. The same way my grandparents would be educated, But the world itself has changed dramatically. It's not the same world. Even from an employment perspective, it's not the same. So why are we still teaching the same? Why are we still avoiding a lot of the stuff that we should be teaching them? Why are we still getting taught? Why is Henry VIII still a massive thing that you're going to be taught, for example, in schools? When in regards of, you're now aware of a broader scope of history, for example. Why are you not even like teaching that? And even like a lot of the necessary skills that people feel like they need, they're not teaching that. And because of the world we live in regard to the kind of information age, a lot of kids are more clued up now. So like, when I used to be in schools a lot more, those are conversations that they used to have with me all the time. So why ain't they teach us about buying a house? Why are they not teaching us about taxes? Could have heard those narratives now and actually think, what, this actually makes sense. Because these are stuff that I hear my parents talking about. But now in school, they're telling me about something else. Why? And then why are you even still teaching and trying to teach them in the same way? So even going back to what we're talking about with the people being excluded, for me, I think a lot of times for me, they don't really do the internal work of, am I doing something wrong in the classroom? Sure. Why the young person is behaving like that in the moment? You try and just stand behind your kind of the system that you've got in place, for example, which is, I've got the book, these are the lessons, you sit down, and I've got all these people backing me up. As long as I stay within that, everything's going to be fine. And I know that there was a lot of outside pressures. There's a lot of people that affect teachers. As I said, for me, it's one of the hardest jobs, I think so. And that's why I always say it. For me, it's one of those, as I said before, it's a hidden environment for me. Because when I started to spend more time in schools, I used to always remember the feeling of, I couldn't work here.
Wow.
I used to think, what, I'm glad I get to leave.
Wow.
Because the system doesn't support itself in order to be like a self-sustained system. It's just, you can see why the teachers, well, I can see anyway for me, why they were so frustrated. Because for me, they were quite isolated. Like the ones who were actually really trying to evoke change, trying to do good work, they're quite isolated, and they're not supported in that moment. They're only really, I don't know, the pressure that they put on them is still the same. It's just get them to that point, get them to this grades, get them like it's not. And if you haven't done that, then you're a bad teacher. You know, when a lot of people, when you ask a lot of people, for example, about their favorite teachers growing up, for me, a lot of people, what they really remember is how that teacher made them feel, not what they taught them. You know, whoever taught you trigonometry, for example, like you probably don't remember that person if you didn't enjoy trigonometry, but a person who actually made you feel seen, cared for, you know, asked you about your day and done that little bit extra. For me, those are the people that people remember. And even like one of the questions that I was going to ask as well was just around that kind of purpose of education. You know, like what do you feel the kind of purpose of education is today?
As in, why does it exist in this country?
Yeah, like, and I think for me, you touched on it a little bit. So because we know what it is now, and almost like why hasn't it changed?
Why hasn't it changed?
And is there a reason behind it not changing? You know, or is it just almost just neglect?
I think it is neglect.
Yeah.
I think when you look at what's being invested, if we truly believe that children are going to one day lead, what are we investing in? What are we investing in the institutions that are schooling them? I don't think it matches up in terms of the importance of the role they are going to take up. But I think that links to our short-sightedness as people and as leaders. We think that we will live forever. And so you don't envision that it's going to be your 5-year-old doing your job one day. You can't make that connection. Yeah. You just can't make that connection. And that, I think that leads to neglect. I think there's also the kind of people who the profession attracts are people who, like we said, just want to do a good thing, just want to help. They are going to be exploited. The people who want to make money do not go into education. So because you're also attracting a certain kind of person, they're less likely to resist. I remember when I was on my maternity leave, there were so many strikes. So that was 2023, so many strikes. Teachers were finally striking. Now, I can only imagine some of the tension that some individuals felt striking at certain points, because we care so much about the work we do and so much about the children that we are teaching. But that is often exploited, not just on a governmental level, but on an institute, just in your school. They know that if you say you need to mentor these children every single week for the next 6 weeks, we're not going to be like, no. We're going to be like, sure, because they need it, and I'm here to help, you know. And so I guess in short, what do I think why are we here? We're here because people don't care enough to make the changes, because it looks like you said, it's working by and large, right? For most people, you went through the system, I went through the system, you went through the system, we're all here, we all went through this system, we're doing okay. So if there are a few it's not working for, why would we change? Why would we radically change it? Now that's the problem, right? And it kind of links to parenting as well. Like sometimes your parents will look at you and be like, oh, well, it can't have been that bad. You're doing great. And it's like, I am doing great, but am I doing great because or in spite? And so we have to ask the question about the education system. Am I doing great because of the education system? Am I doing it well in spite of it?
Yeah.
And I think more people are doing well in spite of it.
Yeah.
And because that nuance, then if they understood that we are just doing our best to overcome some of the barriers that the education, some of the things that education taught us. I put up a post the other day about the labels that teachers throw around and how they're following children until they're adults into their adulthood, into their workplace. They still feel like they're disruptive, that they can't achieve because somebody said that to them when they were 6 years old in primary school. They have become, in spite of the education system, those things have to change. But everything's fine, you know. People are passing. People are going to work. Well, nothing to see here.
Yeah, no, I definitely think it's that. And like what I was saying, I think because it works, I said, for me, it works for the people in power.
Okay.
So when you think about how a politician, for example, becomes prime minister, a lot of times it's a clear defined route. You know, you went to this school, probably a grammar school, whatever. You went to this university, red brick, one of the top universities. You went to this He's part of this association. He's part of that group, and then you end up as a prime minister, for example, or you end up as the minister of education. So for you personally, that's a real clear and effective route. It makes sense. And if you come from a place where you can actually recreate that, to you, it's not broken. It's working quite well, because the standard, for example, of teaching falls dramatically depending on your postcode, where you live, where you grow up. And that's one thing I think a lot of people aren't aware as well. Like, they think it's a generic experience that everyone's having, when it's not. You go to some schools, for example, it's the level of teaching is quite low, and other places it's quite high. And obviously, as a lot of people naturally, I won't say they go through the easy routes, but it's like you don't want stress. So a lot of people who are really good, for me, end up either being headhunted and lifted out of the kind of the system, or they just leave like for other reasons because literally like they can't cope. Like, it's not, a lot of times, even when I think of some of the schools that are really kind of not doing so well, for me it's almost like a vicious cycle, because that school didn't get a reputation. Then when that school gets a reputation, almost no one wants to work there. So if no one wants to work there, the level of teachers that you are going to get even applying for these roles, so it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy from that perspective, because it's like nobody wants hard work and stress, like, or what you perceive to be hard work and stress. You want to feel like, you are going to be able to go in, do your job. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be like the fantasy that you thought it was going to be. If it's this school now, it's got its reputation for almost like chewing up teachers and spitting them out on a monthly basis, you're not going to go for those jobs. But ultimately, those schools still have to function. They still have to work. They still have to somehow maintain. And that's the problem that I see a lot of them having, and even when they try to rebrand, so I see that quite a bit as well. Like, you might change your name, and the schools even near me, for example, they've probably changed the name 3 times.
Wow.
But because we still know it's that same school, parents are still not sending their kids there. But they are trying to rebrand and stuff like that. But ultimately, it doesn't work. And they've got environmental issues as well. Like, what I've noticed in some parts of kind of North London, there's a lot of schools that are actually closing down. Just because of almost migration as well, where they're having, there's almost more schools in certain areas than there is pupils, because a lot of people are actually moving out.
It's happening.
And they're not being replaced at that same rate. So now schools are almost fighting over like, small groups of people, and like they're having to close down, and like there's a lot there's a lot going on that I think a lot of people don't know until you're forced to know. And I think that's even what I was saying before. That's what I like a lot of the work that you do, because you do a lot of work around informing people. And I think awareness for me is always the key. Because a lot of parents for me just don't know, and it's not their fault. They've had no experience with the system, especially some that what I've noticed, for example, where you get some from migrant backgrounds. Where for me, even myself, for example, I've been through the system, so I've got a certain level of awareness about the system. But just say if I come from another country and I've got no awareness of the system, I'm gonna have no idea about my rights. As a parent, I've got like how people react to people like in positions of authority, for example. A lot of people don't really challenge it because they're used to, that's their interactions of dealing with people in authority. So it'll be like, if the school says that, that's the law. I mean, that's not the law. You can challenge it, number one. And number two, sometimes they get it wrong. But sometimes, because people are not aware of that, that's where they go wrong. And how they interact with their children as well, it can affect that as well. Because for me, it's like you may feel, whether it's your culture, whether it is that, that teacher is right, you don't even listen to a young person. Because you just see that teacher in a position of power and be like, almost like, why would they lie? Sometimes they lie. They're humans. It's not just because they said it. And I think that's why, for me personally, you always need to have that kind of relationship with your kids. Like where it's like, I remember my daughter saying to me once, she said to me, what, Dad, she told me something, and then I think the teacher was going against her. And I remember she said to me, what, Dad, you know me, I wouldn't lie to you. And because I had that relationship with her, she doesn't lie, she's not a liar. I can now go 10 toes in deep and say, what, where I think if you don't have that relationship with your young person, it's quite difficult, because I have been around kids that lie, for example, and then now as much as you want to go 10 toes in with the defense, you're thinking, yeah, you kind of lie sometimes, you know.
Sometimes, I don't know.
Which is, I mean, which is tricky, So, but it's a really, as I said, it's a real difficult job for me, kind of on both sides. So in regards to their teachers per se, do you think they get all the support that they need?
Do I think that teachers get all the support that they need? No. I do think teachers receive support.
Yeah.
I also think that there are some teachers who shouldn't be teachers, and so they get even more support. So I think sometimes in the profession, if you are overrun with work, you're overloaded, but you're excelling, you will not be given the support that you need because you're fine, right? And if you have perfectionist tendencies, you're an overachiever, whatever you've got going on there that is making you still perform despite what's going on systemically, you're fine. But there are teachers who need a lot of support because their classes are failing because they are failing to teach them well.
Yeah.
They get support. They get a lot of support. Now, what they really should get is a conversation around competency.
Yeah.
Is this the space for you? If you're stressed out every single day and crying after every lesson and your grades are there's no relationship, the grades are bad, we need to sit down and have a frank conversation. Now, that's not happening enough, actually, in schools. I would say I don't think that's happening enough. What we say, hey, it's the end of the road. I think it happens more in private sector.
Yeah.
They're more likely. Teachers, part of the reason, of course, there's lots of systemic other things, but part of the reason we're getting the grades we're getting is because some of them don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
But those difficult conversations aren't being had.
Yeah, it's definitely. I think it's really tricky, for anybody for me who works in any form of vocational type field as well, and even for someone who previously, for example, I have someone who took a hobby and then turned it into a business, and it's always the issues that you have in regards to that, as in when something's your hobby, it's about your passion, it's it's what you love, but once it becomes work, it's about putting food on the table.
Yeah.
You've got other pressures. And for me, that's what I've noticed just in regards to teachers as well, is that even if you might know you're a bad teacher, but you've got bills, you've got kids, making yourself voluntarily unemployed isn't what people do in this kind of society that we live in with all the pressures.
Appreciated, but I'll say that there is so much at risk. There's so much at stake if you're a bad teacher.
Yeah.
Lives are at stake if you're a bad teacher. We can't afford for you to, prioritise, I've got bills. You need to get another job that pays those bills, respectfully. Because if you, for example, you're a teacher who hates your job, you hate the children, I need you to leave immediately because you are ruining a child's relationship with learning. And that has grave ramifications that aren't necessarily overcome in this lifetime.
Yeah.
I need you to pack up and keep going.
Yeah.
And I get it. We've all got bills and we put ourselves first. I've got food to put on the table. I understand that. I appreciate that. But there are other jobs.
Yeah.
I think what is happening is sometimes people think that teaching is easier and that it's comfortable. Teaching isn't easy, but it's easier the longer you stay.
Yeah.
The longer you stay in a school,
with anything,
it gets real easy. Yeah. Why? Because you've written your curriculum, which you're not going to change. You know everybody. They know that you don't like the work and you don't want to do the work. So you just sit pretty. You're protected. You join the union and you're fine. But I really want, especially teachers who have become complacent, who know they don't like the work and have other dreams, understand but you think that the children can't tell that you don't like them. It's cancerous. The environments that are being cultivated through your disdain of these children. It is better that you leave despite how comfortable you are. And that is what I truly believe.
Yeah, no, I think definitely, I definitely agree with you that obviously it's dangerous the longer, that you stay. But I do wish the system was better at identifying it earlier.
Yes.
For me. And that's even going back to what I was saying about the teacher training and the things like that for me, because I do think that if that was better,
yes,
if they had a better idea of what was to come, that is the time to say no for a lot of people. It's almost like, you know what, try it. It's almost like shortly, because we're kind of wrapping up now. Tell me a little bit more about the work that you're doing now. So you've left the system now.
Sure.
tell me a little bit about
it just, it just depends on the day. So I am I'm an English consultant. And so I go into schools and I help them with their English department. I'm also what you would call a DEI consultant as well. I say DEI consultant because I think it's more about culture. DEI is important, right? But it's not just about whether or not the black children are being seen, or if you're trans, whether you have rights. That is important, but culture is important. So we spoke about at the very beginning about how prisons and schools are, they're twins, separated at birth. That is the culture. And so I speak to schools about how they can transform their culture. I also do a lot of work online. So that's informing parents, educating educators, educating teachers about the different ways that schools work and how to make a difference in the spaces they are in. And so, yes, working with businesses as well, doing a lot of culture work there, speaking about how to foster belonging and inclusivity. Yeah, sometimes I'm writing a book at the moment, and so it just depends on the day. So today you find me, I'm on a podcast, but tomorrow I'm going to be writing my book, and so it just depends.
And lastly, what is your kind of personal unwritten rule? So the unwritten rule would be, it's almost like a rule that you kind of live by, something that kind of underpins just everything that you do.
An unwritten rule is like, probably you have a voice, and so you need to use it. And so if I saw somebody being mean to somebody outside there, I would say something. I've separated lots of fights on the streets where people don't know me. If I see somebody stealing, like I've seen secondary school kids stealing in a shop, I'll go up to them and be like, you don't have to do this. I'll pay for it. You don't have to do this. I don't know who I think I am, but this voice that I use, what I do online, I do with my friends. If I see, I'm like, I just don't think this is what we need to be doing. That is what I use my voice. So my unwritten rule is, I've got a voice, I need to use it.
That's using your voice. Yeah, thank you. We brought it to a close, but thank you for coming quickly. Let everybody know where they can find you.
You can find me on Instagram at Miss Joy Mbakwe, TikTok at Miss Joy Mbakwe, and Joy Mbakwe on LinkedIn. And that's where I work.
No worries.